Hey everybody, it's Friday, and that means it's time for another episode of There's No Crying in Crochet. I'm your host today, Debbie from Madam Stitch, and this is my cohort in crime.
I am Biz from Busy Crochet. So glad everybody's here.
Yeah, and we are here to talk to you all about the things that frustrate you, the things you want to know more about. It's all about crochet. So we're going to do some business first. Because we stream on with StreamYard, we ask that you subscribe to our YouTube channels, Busy Crochet and Madam Stitch Crochet, because not only do we do these podcast episodes, we do other things as well. So if you make our designs, if you love to just hang out with us, you can just put us on continuous play on that podcast playlist. So make sure you turn on subscribe, because that way you'll get a notification every time something new is coming down the pike.
Yeah.
And if you are watching today on Facebook, one of our Facebook pages, make sure that you give StreamYard permission to display your name, because we love chatting with real people. They don't use that information for anything else except to make us happy. So we want to converse with you, not anonymous Facebook user.
Yes.
Yay. Okay. All right. That's the business.
The business.
Oh, no, we need to get rid of that one. Okay. Just a note of caution today.
Yes.
Biz and I always have a tete-a-tete before we get on. And we've discovered that this week has pretty much beaten us raw. So, which is what we're going to talk about now. And so our brains are just a little off, which actually should work really well with our personalities, because we're off all the time anyway.
Yes,
but the first thing we talk about is what's up this week. So Biz, I'm gonna let you start.
So my week's been, really busy because Steph and the baby stayed home this week. She wasn't feeling well, the baby. She had a 102 fever, and there's nothing wrong with her. Apparently there's some virus going around the daycare, so she was home for a few days this week. And she's been super, super, super cranky. So that's been really fun. And other than that, it's just been a normal week. Today we had a new heater put in, so I was up super duper early, and I need a nap. That's just really where I'm at.
Or just stay in bed until tomorrow. I like that idea.
Yeah, that'll be nice too. But I got a meeting I got to go to tonight, so it's not going to work.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Stop scheduling things for Friday night. There you go.
Who does that?
I don't know.
So
Nobody's sane. Oh, this week, let's see. Well, Madam Stitch is super busy. The Cal started on Monday, and we're starting to see pictures in the Facebook group. And on Instagram, there's one woman who's just been tagging me like crazy on Instagram.
That's great.
So I'm loving that.
Mm-hmm.
And it all kind of went off without a hitch, so that's a good thing. But last Sunday, I know I mentioned in a previous episode that half of our family, we have 8 in our small nuclear family, half of our family was out of the country for Christmas, actual Christmas. So this past Sunday, we got the gang together and we had a second Christmas. So we normally only have biscuits and gravy once a year, and that's Christmas morning. We've had it twice, which is great because we love that recipe. But we got together for our traditional Christmas breakfast, British Christmas crackers. We all wore our golden crowns while we ate breakfast. And then we exchanged gifts. I don't know if I mentioned before, but I was working on 2 blankets.
Yes, you did.
2 granny square blankets. They're modified granny squares, so they have some interesting design features in them. Mm-hmm. Those were for the grandsons, and so I gifted them on Sunday, and those 2 spent the rest of the time we were together wrapped up in them. So yay for grandma and granny square blankets. Life is grand.
You got your ends tucked in then?
Oh, okay.
That was
so yes. Well, that brings up, that could be a whole other podcast, the debate about whether you weave them in as you go or at the end of the project. I go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to get into the debate today.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you, 2 adult-sized granny square blankets with none of the ends tucked in,
Oh,
left to the 24 hours before. It
oh,
was not a pretty sight. No, it was
it
not
race
pretty.
to the
So
finish.
I need to rethink my strategy.
Yeah.
It's not waiting till the end. But anyway, it's
Jeanette says she loves to weave in as you go. I do too. I'm a weaver as I go. Or however, I do find that when I'm working on a design, I have a tendency to leave my ends longer than if I'm making a like pre-done pattern, because if I'm making motifs or squares or whatever, I'll tuck all my ends in and everybody's all put together. But if I'm designing, my brain just goes, oh, I just want to move on to the next thing, so
like I said, I think this might be fodder for another episode.
Yeah,
the great debate, and then we could talk about how to weave in ends so that they don't poke out. So that's crochet skills for February. Who knew? Okay.
Go.
Oh, let me get back to where I need to be. All right, so today is our monthly crochet skills episode, and today we're talking all about biology. Not really. We're talking about the anatomy of a stitch today. And while that may sound super simplistic, there's actually a lot involved in what we call the different parts of a stitch and how we work with them as designers and makers. So in a previous episode, previous crochet skills episode, we talked about where to insert your hook. So today we're going to break down some basic stitches. We're going to identify the parts of a stitch. We're going to talk about some common crochet terminology, and then talk about some special characteristics of different stitches so that you can be the most informed crochet maker on the planet. All right, so because a lot of us are visual learners, I made a presentation so we could have show and tell. Yay, it's not fancy, it does the job. So what I'm going to encourage all of you listeners to do is watch the episode on full screen, because when you watch it on a small screen, it tends to get hard to read those pieces of text. So I'm going to get us into it right here. So today we're talking about the anatomy of a stitch, right? So let's dive right in. All right, in the grand scheme of things, basic stitches, what is the very first thing we start with in practically every project we do with crochet? Biz, you're on the spot. What do we do?
It's the foundation chain.
It's the foundation chain.
Yeah.
I have to just insert here for someone who's tried to teach someone else crochet. We as crocheters think the chain is the simplest stitch, when in fact it's actually very difficult for a new crocheter, especially getting those chains even as you gauge all of that kind of stuff. But what I thought would be fun to look at is there are 2 sides to a foundation chain.
Yep.
Right?
Yes. There's the top, which of course is the front. It looks like the regular stitch. And then there's the opposite side, which has got the bump or that bar on the other side of your chain, which personally, that's where I always work my stitches into as I'm coming back.
Right. So the first row gets worked into, first row around, generally gets worked into this foundation chain. And the designer, let's say you don't have any indication in the pattern as to where you're supposed to work into the foundation chain. Assume that it's with the front side, the loops facing you, and you're going to insert your hook in the middle of one of those loops, right? Um, I have a question for you, Biz.
Uh-huh.
Um, you may not have an answer for this, it may not matter. When you are inserting your hook in the loop, do you have just the top loop above the hook and everything else below it? Or do you insert your hook under the top loop and that bar at the back with just the bottom loop underneath?
Well,
What
I'm
do you
gonna be
like?
honest, I almost never ever start my work into the front side of that. I always use the back
Really?
bar. Yep, always. And the reason I do that is because the that front side where you're saying to go in between those two bars, that front side actually looks like a finished stitch along the bottom
Mhm.
when you will crochet into the back bar. So that's why and it was a habit that I picked up years and years ago, because I don't like, you know me and my weird loops. I don't like the way that it looks because it doesn't look like a finished stitch when you put it into the front.
True.
It has those two bars hanging down, and it bothers me. So because I'm a weirdo and I'm OCD ish, I'm not taking away from anybody who actually is. But I go into the back loop only, and that's where I put all of my stitches, and it looks like a finished stitch.
And I will say that it's particularly helpful when you've got pieces that have to be sewn together because
Uh-huh.
it gives you a more stable edge
It does.
to seam together. Now, where I was going with that question
Mhm.
was I, over the years, I pretty much always go into the front,
Uh-huh.
but I will work into it so that the top loop and the back bar are above my hook
Okay.
and only the bottom loop is left. And
Sure.
what that does is give you, you were talking about that wonky edge that's
Yeah.
just kind of hanging there. That eliminates a lot of that hang.
Right.
So, and if your chains are not particularly loose, then that bottom edge isn't quite so, um, you can't see it quite so much.
Mhm. It just has a little, like, there's no structure to it. It doesn't look like a
Right.
stitch. It just looks like a couple of pieces hanging there. So that's why I went with the other way. But I mean, it makes sense because then it's kind of like when you are working in the middle of a project and you have to work in either the front or the back loop only, so that one of your loops hangs out so that you can go back and put stuff into it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
It's it
No,
it ends up looking that same way.
right. But I agree with all of that. What makers need to know, though, is
Mhm.
in a pattern, if it doesn't specify, then you don't have to work into that back bump. Usually
Right.
that's something that designers will put into the pattern to
Mhm.
say, at least that's what I do, to say that's something special.
Okay. I actually I never put any instructions in there. I figure people do the base chain the way that they want to.
Right.
Um, but like, that's the difference between the way that you write and the way that I write, is just that
Hmm.
you want to point out that the foundation chain needs to look a certain way,
Right.
and that's, I mean, which is good. It follows along with your design principles. So, um,
Well, I'll do that a lot when I'm designing a cowl that has a
okay,
top and a bottom,
sure,
or can be, if it's got a reversible pattern or whatever, and you can put it on any way you want
sure,
by working into the back bump of the foundation chain. Then I finish the whole cowl off with a
right,
single crochet or something like that. The loops look the same on both edges.
right.
And I'm huge into symmetry. It's just a quirk of mine. So I want to make sure that, that little detail makes all the difference in my
Yeah, for
in
sure.
my eye. All right. So that's the foundation chain. Next up, how do you tell the right and wrong side of a stitch? It's
Hmm.
actually pretty easy
Hmm.
once you know what you're looking for. So the right side of the stitch, when you're working a row or a round, is actually facing you. The row
Hmm.
that you're working on is actually facing you. But let's say you've finished a project and you don't know which is the wrong or right side of the last round of stitches, the fun thing is that those top loops will slightly slant toward you.
Yeah.
So that means you're looking at not necessarily the right side of that work. You're looking at the right side of the stitches of the last round or row that you worked.
Right.
So you can tell whether that was in play. In the right-hand screen, what you'll see picture is the wrong side. So I've actually turned it a little bit toward you. When you're looking at the wrong side of a stitch, those top loops actually slant away from you, but you'll see the third loop very clearly underneath it.
Yeah. Yep. And so this is a half double crochet that we're looking at, just so that everybody's on page with what
actually that's oh yeah, on the right hand side it is, on the left hand side, oh I guess it is, yeah, both of them are, yeah, you're right.
But so yeah, there's always that. And the other thing too is and I'm probably throwing information into this, maybe confusing the point, but a lot of times designers will put in there, mark your right side, because they're going to be flipping things around and moving things a lot. So using a stitch marker. Oh, and Loopy Knot says a stitch marker on the left hand side is a cheat for beginners. There's always that as well. Sometimes just putting a marker on one of the stitches on the right side of your work just reminds you, oh, this is the right side. So later on, when you're looking in the pattern and they're like working on the right side or having the right side facing you, you know which side is the right side.
Right. Correct. But in this particular panel, we're looking at the right and wrong side of just the stitch, right? So the top loop slanting toward you or away from you is what you're looking at. All right. Next up, now we did this one in a previous episode. So Biz, would you like to kind of recap what we talked about, where to insert the hook?
Yeah. So, most of us are pretty familiar with this at this point. But if you're not, the left side, it shows you with the right side facing you. So anytime your right side is facing you, actually, it doesn't matter if the right side is facing you or the wrong side is facing you. The loop closest to you is always the front loop. The loop away from you is always the back loop. And then like when you're looking at a half double crochet and the back side of that stitch is facing you, the third lip the third loop is what she has pointed out there, just so that you can see it. But should that be where that's actually facing you, that third loop is actually going to be just over the edge of that back loop. It's just right behind it. So so it's still there. And sometimes designers will have you work in the third loop of a stitch with the right side facing you. So just be aware that can happen too. But yeah, anytime and no matter which way it's facing you, these never move. They're always the same. It just depends on what side they want you to be doing all of this on.
Right. So I work in the third loop in granny square modifications. And you never, in my granny squares, at least, unless I have to, but usually you're not turning after any round. So the right side is always facing you. So the third loop, if you look at the left hand picture, the third loop would be on the back side of what you're looking at, just underneath where the back loop sits.
Yeah, like right over that edge.
Yeah. Yep. All right. All right, that's a great recap of the top of the stitch. All right, and this one, we're talking about the post. So the post is the vertical portion of the stitch. Plain and simple, that's all it is. Yep. The taller the stitch, the longer the post.
The more generous the post.
Right? On a single crochet, that post is teensy tiny. And there is no post on a slip stitch. None. No. Zip. So I wanted to put up here a distinction between working where the post is. So that would be working your post stitches, your front and back post, working you inserting your hook around that post. But oftentimes I will ask crocheters to work stitches between the post and actually between the stitches. And that's that space between the posts. That's what it means to work between the stitches.
You're not actually going into a stitch and you're not actually going around a post. You're just going into that space in between.
Right. Now I do this a lot with granny stitches. My granny stitch designs, I might have a chain one space or I might not. It sort of depends upon how my square is behaving and what's around it as to whether I really need that chain one space.
Right.
So if that chain one space is missing, we would work that granny stitch, which is 3 double crochets worked in the same stitch or space, in the space between stitches where I might have put that chain one space.
Yep.
All right.
There isn't much else to
now. Does anyone really talk about the horizontal bars? Probably not. But it's to your advantage to know what they are, because as we start to innovate ways to make new stitches, like the linked stitches use these horizontal bars. The stacked single crochet uses the horizontal. There are certain innovative stitches and techniques that are going to start using those horizontal bars, and knowing what they are is really important.
Yeah.
So on the left, you see a double crochet. The horizontal bar is the number of yarn overs you work before you insert your hook into the indicated stitch to make that particular stitch. So for a double crochet, I yarn over once, insert my hook, and then complete the stitch. So there's one horizontal bar right in the middle of the stitch that you could see there. For a treble crochet, and we're using US crochet terminology here, for a treble crochet, you yarn over twice, then insert your hook. So you have 2 horizontal bars.
Yeah. And sometimes it's helpful for you to figure out, like, if you come back to a project and you're like, oh, did I make a treble? Did I make a double treble? Did I make a double treble? It'll
all the trebles.
It'll help you to figure out how many of those bars you have going across, because that'll tell you how many times you wound before you went into your stitch, and it'll say, oh, well, that was a double treble, or that was a treble, or whatever. It just helps you to recognize your stitches.
Right. Now for the half double crochet, there's a yarn over before you insert your hook. But because you pull through all 3 loops to finish the stitch, instead of being 2 and then 2, that horizontal bar sits right up underneath the top loops. It's not in the center like it is for the double crochet that you see there. And a single crochet has no yarn over before you insert it. So it just looks like a V with a loop on top.
Yep. Yeah, one thing that always helped me to know what was half double crochet, when you're first starting out and you're just looking at your stitches and you're like, what did I just make? Is it, to me, I always thought the half double crochet is just so cute and squishy, because it's got all 3 of its little bars are just right there and squish. So that always helped me to realize that wasn't a single crochet because there's too many bars there, but it wasn't a double crochet because it didn't have enough height. So.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
If
okay. Little tips and tricks, I love it. All right, next up. All right, have you noticed, I do a lot of crocheting just in rows of double crochet because I'm weird like that. Have you noticed that your stitches slant?
Yes. They slant for everything, but yes, the longer your stitch is, especially if you're doing back and forth rows, the more leany they are.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth.
For those of you who make amigurumi or things in the round that have joins, if you don't take steps otherwise, your join starts to travel because that's just the way the stitches line up. There are special techniques to get that join to be straight up and down, but it won't happen if you don't take those special steps because the stitches themselves slant.
That is true. One of the hardest things that I ever learned how to do, when you're working with like an intarsia where you're working your stitches in as you're going through and just carrying the yarn behind, so there's a picture within whatever you're doing, was putting tummies on amigurumi without it turning into a blob that leans to one side. You have to do a lot of math and figure out. It takes a lot of writing down to keep that sucker straight. Because I don't think
a lot of experimenting.
Special tricks.
Yeah, I am especially enamored with anyone who does amigurumi because that's just not my jam, and that's one of the reasons I just never learned that technique of lining that up, doing the color changes without the zigzag, and it's a special kind of person who does amigurumi as far as I'm concerned.
And that's why I don't do it very much.
All right, one last point before we move on from this slant. Because I work with granny squares all the time, I do larger works that are just basic granny squares. So a fabulously easy project to do is a baby blanket with a gradient yarn that changes colors, fun colors throughout. You let the yarn do the work for you and you just keep doing a granny square.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, if you don't take steps, your granny square is not a square. It's something. It's something else. So one of the tips that I give for anyone who does larger granny squares is about every 3 or 4 rounds, just change direction. Just work at least 1 or 2 rounds in the opposite direction on the wrong side. No one will be able to tell except you, but they will be able to tell that your granny square blanket isn't like that.
Isn't a whirly gig when you're done with it.
Yeah, it's great. It's fabulous.
It's a trippy.
I thought you were good at crochet. I am, but you've got a wonky blanket. All right, let's see here. What do we have next? Oh, this is a fun one. Okay. All right, raise your hand in the comments if you've ever heard of a golden loop. Oh, wait. No, I'm just kidding. I know what it is. Okay. So anyway, the golden loop is the first loop you pull up after inserting your hook, yarn over, and pull up. So that's the very first loop that you pull up. So what I'm working here would be either a double crochet or a half double crochet, one of the two. That golden loop is super duper important when you're working on gauge. Why would that be, Biz?
That is because if you are trying to reach a specific measurement, because the golden loop deals with the height of a stitch, not the width, because that can be changed by a hook or any of that kind of stuff. But this deals specifically with the height of your stitch. And if you don't pull that golden loop up high enough, you're going to get a very squat stitch, which is going to bring your measurements down and you won't reach gauge.
Right. So I think a lot of makers feel like all they have to do is change hook size to meet gauge, but it's not that simple. So when you measure your gauge swatch or whatever you're doing, and you need to adjust the stitch size you haven't reached, or you're over, or whatever, your stitch count doesn't match, you adjust the hook size. If you don't meet row, then you adjust the golden loop. And that's really tough because, Biz, I don't know about you, but I've been crocheting about a gajillion years. So to change the way I make the stitch takes an act of God.
It does. You have to stop and think so much.
Yep. And think about making a whole blanket or a whole garment or, and then having to think about that golden loop all the time. Yikes.
A lot of times when I'm making something, as long as I'm hitting my width, I don't worry about the length as much. And that's just me. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if I can get my gauge where it's maybe less than a quarter of an inch away, I can usually block that to reach the gauge once I'm done. If it's real far off, then I have to make changes.
Yeah.
But as long as I can get my width where it needs to be, because that's the hardest to gain control over, you can block height in there if you're feeling, if you're feeling crazy, which I usually don't. I can't do the golden loop. I am like, once I get into the rhythm, I'm going. I don't have time to stop and go, oh God, is that high enough? And then move on.
Right. And that's that, especially if you're making something that relies heavily on finished measurements for pieces or for the overall sweater, right?
Yes.
You need to check gauge often to make sure that you aren't, because we get more time of, okay, that's a different discussion. But anyway, gauge is just crazy. Yes. But the golden loop, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. And it's one that
all right. Now, before we go on to the next part, I'm going to put this up here because I would love to, right? Any tips on dealing with the weight of a king-size granny square blanket while crocheting them together? Do you mean the squares? Oh, yes. While you're crocheting the squares, you know, I kind of dealt with this on Friday when I was putting all of the squares together, but I was working with a worsted weight yarn, and it wasn't king size. I don't know. I would have maybe a chair or a table nearby that you can kind of drape it over. I don't know if that helps. No, there you go. I would guess using a table would work best to deal with weight. Yeah, I actually see Instagram creators joining on a table surface. I tend to do it in my recliner. So if that's the case, I might drape it over the raised foot or have a little TV tray next to me. But maybe working on your dining room table would be a good solution for that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Biz?
It'll take the strain off of your shoulders trying to support all of that.
Plus, I don't know, but the bigger the blanket gets, the more you're working up here because the pile's gotten so
and
so high.
100 degrees underneath all of that and 55 pounds. Those blankets can get heavy.
It really can. Even baby blankets can get heavy. Oh, Lordy. Okay. All right. So we're going to start talking now about characteristics of various stitches so that you can kind of catalog this information for when you see these in patterns. So first up, which stitches do we think use the most yarn? They gobble up. They're just yarn hogs. Those are.
Well, I don't know if you have it because I didn't go back to our notes, but there's one that's literally called a yarn eater, and it's the Catherine's wheel or the Bavarian stitch.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't think that they would use so much, but oh my gosh. There was one time I thought I used to be really hung up on making Catherine wheel and Bavarian stitch. The Bavarian is my favorite just because I like the texture in it. But I thought I'm just going to do one out of scraps. I'm just going to use my stash. So it uses so much yarn that by the time I got maybe my 4th or 5th round into it, I was going through a half of a skein. Skein. And there were times when I actually was using entire skeins of yarn. You're only doing 2 rows for each strip.
But it's multiple yarn overs per stitch.
Jesus, yeah, because you're doing treble crochet until you are treble crocheted out, and you have got so many.
Yep.
There's at one point there are so many loops on your hook that you're like, okay, just don't drop any. Just don't drop any.
Don't you hate to start over? Oh my Lord.
Oh my Lord, because then you have had to do that. Where I drop something and then there's all these little thingies just sticking up. Like,
well, we're going to start over on that one. Another one that does, now that you mentioned that, is the star stitch.
Oh yeah.
Which is, again, that's a 2-row repeat, but it's working a loop into the stitch, working a loop into the stitch, working a loop at the base of the stitch, working a loop in the next stitch, yarn over, then you start that all over again, then you come back for a pass with either single crochets or double crochets. And that one, while I love the look of it, it just sucks the life out of your yarn supply. Do not make a blanket out of it because it will cost you a fortune and take forever. Just saying. The class of stitches that I was thinking of first would be puffs, bobbles, clusters.
Well, and loopy knots
popcorn
is the alligator scale stitch.
Oh gosh. Oh, okay. Fun story, loopy knots. Years ago, my daughter saw this fun crocodile scale. Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Alligator scale,
alligator scale, some of that crocodile stitch, whatever. Cocoon sweater. Now, cocoon sweater. Need I say more?
No.
And and I don't know, that might have taken 10 skeins of yarn. It was ridiculous and just took forever. Yes, I appreciate that's a crazy one.
So if I was ever going to try that, because I've never made it, but I've seen it made. And if I was ever going to try that one, I might try and make one of those little like D&D dice bags where it looks like a little egg or something like that, or a dragon egg. But I don't think that I would do anything bigger than that because
sweater. It was awful. And I'm not really sure how much she wore it because that sucker was hot.
I bet it was
hot because you just have layer upon layer upon, whatever. Okay, so puffs, bobbles, clusters, popcorns, because they're multi-loop stitches worked in the same stitch, right?
Yeah.
Post stitches take more yarn.
Isn't that crazy?
They're taller, right? So if you do something like a basket weave or a waffle stitch or any of those common stitch patterns like that use post, cables would, right? Because you're working a longer stitch over the top of others. Yeah. So those is there anything else, Biz, that you can think of that takes a lot of
just the taller your stitch, the more yarn you're going to use. Just it's basic math,
and the more loops to it.
Yes, the more texture you have in something, the more yarn you're going to use. Just in reality.
Exactly. All right. Next up, which stitches create the strongest, most durable fabric?
Your good old single crochet.
Single crochet.
That one is going to be like, bulletproof almost. Because the stitch is so close together, it leaves no holes. And so for me, that would be the strongest, most durable fabric. Do you have something else that?
Well, I'm going to throw this in before I move on to another example. Single crochet blankets take forever and they're really heavy.
Yes.
So think about that when you see, there are tons of them out there and they're gorgeous because you can do so much with them, but they're really heavy and take forever. Just a word to the wise.
You're just going to want to give yourself a minute to think about it before you start one.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get halfway through and you're going to be like, what did I do? Why did I do this? Do I hate myself? What is going on?
What was I thinking? We talked about this when this one was brought up in the last Crochet Skills episode, and we haven't really talked about the stitch, but the waistcoat stitch is a really durable. I see that one used a lot for baskets and
Yeah.
things that need to have some structure.
Yeah. It's a very,
Yeah.
very sturdy stitch. I mean, very sturdy, and it will create like a sweater like because it mimics a knit stitch. And
Yes.
so it creates, and I shouldn't say mimic just a knit stitch, but like a knit, and then when you purl on the other side so that it creates that oh my god, I knit and I can't think of what that's called. Boo, 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 boo.
Well, it's been a while. I know garter stitch.
Oh god, when it just creates the nice fabric on the front side.
That's nobody's helping us out. Sweater stitch. It's not sweater stitch. I don't know.
Neve, where are you when I need you? I'm gonna think of it as soon as this is over.
I know, right? You can put it. You can put it in the comments.
But yeah. So anyway, it makes a really nice fabric. It's very flat.
Mm-hmm.
You can use it for intarsia. It works really well with color changing. It kind of feels like a mosaic almost. Stockinette
stitch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, there you go. We've been saved from embarrassment. It's great. Biz, have you ever done linked stitches?
No, what is that?
Ooh, okay. Linked, yes. So remember back when we were on the page that talked about horizontal bars?
Yeah.
Okay, so a linked stitch is used a lot with taller stitches like double crochet and taller when you want to close the gaps between the stitches. So instead of, how do we do this? So instead of yarning over before you insert your hook, let's take a double crochet for instance.
Okay.
You insert your hook into the horizontal bar of the stitch you just made,
okay.
Yarn over and pull up a loop there.
Okay.
Then insert your hook in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop there. You have 3 loops on your hook. Then you do the usual finish off. So instead of yarning over and just inserting your hook, you do nothing with yarn overs. You insert your hook in the first horizontal bar.
Okay.
Yarn over and pull it back through, 2 loops on the hook.
Uh-huh.
Insert your hook into the indicated stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop, 3 loops on the hook. Pull through 2, your double crochet is finished. And now the double crochets are linked together with no space between.
Interesting.
And you just do that across the row. I actually have a designer that I tech edit for who does these. She did a peppermint candy coaster in red, white, red, white, red, white. And she did it all in linked double crochets or linked treble crochets, one of the two,
wow.
so that there were no spaces in between. And she even had a process for closing the gap at the join so that those were linked together. It was crazy. It is. But I will say I tried to make a scarf a year ago with linked double crochets, and A, it takes a lot of yarn, and B, it's so time consuming. It really, because again, like the golden loop, you got to be thinking about where to insert your hook instead of just doing a straight up double crochet.
Yeah, I can know it would be tedious,
but it's great though.
Yeah.
All right, so now, which stitches are the fastest and slowest to work? So we already addressed the single crochet. They're fast to work, but slow to complete a project. Right?
Okay, so I would think, if you're looking to just, let's pretend we're just making a blanket and we want to use a simple stitch. A double crochet is a very fast way to make a blanket. If you're looking to just do one stitch.
Yeah, I don't know fastest and slowest to work. I guess it kind of depends upon you. The taller the stitch, the faster the project goes, right?
Yes, but the slower it is to work the stitch. Because you're yarning over till Jesus comes back, and then you got to go.
Yes, you are. Thank you for that image, Biz. I appreciate it. So,
I mean, we get into our rhythm, so it doesn't take that long, but it's just, it can be pokey.
well, I think I alluded to this before earlier in the episode where I said double crochet is like I love doing double crochet. And I will explain in a moment why that is. But I can make double crochets, half double crochets, and double crochets till the cows come home and not think about it. And so for me, that works fast. So maybe the fastest and slowest are the ones that are fastest and slowest for you. So what is your favorite stitch, right? What do you find mindless? That's your fastest. Which do you have to think about the most? That's your slowest.
Okay. So it would probably
Maybe.
be different for me only because when I'm working on something, my brain goes, where can I stick a bobble? Where,
Yes.
where can I put some piece of texture? There's got to be something bumpy in this. So for me, probably out of all of those stitches, that would be the slowest would be maybe like a popcorn stitch. And the only reason is because I have to take my hook out and reinsert it and pull through. That's the pokey part.
Yep.
Otherwise, I don't think about it so much because I'm so used to doing them.
Right. Yeah, I do have to think about that a little bit. The stitches we were talking about that take the most yarn, Catherine wheel, star stitch, those kinds of things take forever. Yes. Gorgeous stitches take forever.
But
they are gorgeous when you're done. Oh well. Okay. Well, all right. At this point, we're going to add a little bit of our own personal touch here. So I'm going to go back to the presentation because show and tell time. And we're going to look at Biz's favorite stitches. All right. Do tell, Ms. Biz, what do you like?
Okay. So these all are representations of my one favorite stitch or two favorite stitches are front post and back post double crochets. So the left is an example of a basket weave. The center is an example of a cable stitch. And then you can hardly see it, but the center of that blanket is nothing but it's a relief made out of front post and back post double crochets. So it looks like a flower or a fire in this instance. Plus, going around that, I used the alpine stitch, which is has a front post double crochet in it. I love the texture, the squishiness, the you can get so much of a picture. It tells a story if you use it in the right way.
Yeah. Now tell everybody what that pattern is on the right. So if they wanted to go look at it,
the
where
pattern
can they
on the
find
right
it?
Is Jiminy Christmas. Pooh. Is it Christmas Fire? You know what? I can't believe I can't remember what it's called. It's my pattern. So give me just a second. I'm like blanking out. But it is a free pattern that you can get on Nana's home. And
cool.
It is free on it is on my blog as well. And it's free there. And give me just a second. I'm gonna try and find, because I can't believe what a lame-o I am. And
well, I should have warned you.
I just can't believe that I can't remember. Okay, I'm gonna blame this on being 53 and menopause brain, because it is called Fireside Christmas. And it's available everywhere, but it is a free pattern on Nana's Crafty Home. That's what it's called.
I just thought since we can't really see the center of it, they could certainly go look it up on the blog.
Yeah, and the other two pictures are of a blanket called Walk in the Woods, and that one's available in Ravelry too. But that one starts. All of these are sampler blankets because I don't know how to stay still. So there's a lot of texture and work and all kinds of woodsy stuff in them, both of them.
I love it. All right. Anything else you want to say about your favorite stitches?
Just they make me happy. And no, I really I love what you can do with them because they're just like I said, it gives so much life to a blanket to me.
Well, if you've never made one of Biz's blankets or done any of her projects, you need to go do it because it's really cool. All right, up next, my favorite stitches. So I'm not the texture queen like Biz is. I'm all about the subtle stuff.
Yeah.
And what you see in the left-hand picture is my wagon wheel square, which I've repurposed for a lot of different projects. Lately, I have a blanket that's coming out in the near future, if I can ever get that one finished with the ends woven in. But this square was included in last year's Granny Stitch sampler blanket. And the stitch that I'm highlighting here is that row of loops on the surface. That's half double crochet worked in the third loop, which creates that faux surface stitching. I don't like surface stitching. I'll do it. Biz made me do it in a project. I happily did it. It was great. But if I have my druthers, I'm going to do the same thing with a half double crochet in the third loop. Right? So in the middle, Granny Squares and I are like BFFs. So if I have a choice between two projects and one is a Granny Square project, that'd be what I'm doing. So that's just simply a picture of a Granny Square scarf, basic Granny Square in 3 colors. And on the right, this is actually a technique. It's slip stitch seam, but it does use the slip stitch. I love to do a slip stitch seam on the right side of the fabric because, as you can see, it creates this really cool checkerboard raised texture. And again, when I'm putting together a whole bunch of squares, I'm not interested in whip stitching because if you have a long piece of thread, it starts to get tangled and wears out. This way I can just crochet directly from the skein. And bonus, I've got some texture to add to it. And last but not least, in all 3 of these projects, you'll see the granny stitch, which is 3 double crochets in the same stitcher space. And that's why I love double crochets so much, because I make lots of granny squares. So lots of double crochets.
Granny Square guru.
I'm there for it. All right, and all of the patterns that you've seen on both are available on our blogs, in our Ravelry and Etsy shops, and all the places where you'd like to find them. Yes, Fire Lake loves the third loop. It's my jam. It's my jam.
Fun. And the third loop is something that I picked up from Debbie because we worked on that project together, the Memories blanket. And that's where I picked up doing the third loop, and she picked up doing like bobbles and things of that nature. So she's starting to add stuff to hers. That's fun rubbing off on each other.
You know what? I love doing other designers' stuff because I learn to like new things.
Yeah.
That's why we encourage you to, yay, if you love our stuff, but go experience lots of different designers and look for new things to do, especially with our crochet skills episodes. You know more than when you started, and that way you can make some informed decisions when you choose your designs.
Definitely.
All right. Unless, Biz, you have anything else that you'd like to add, that basically covers it for this episode.
Thank you, Lucy. She says we have great chemistry. I'm assuming you.
Oh, wait, I missed it. Hey. Oh, thank you. Oh yeah. We kind of dig hanging out together.
Yeah. We met completely by accident-ish. I mean, as far as this podcast is going, I was doing a different project and she was a guest on that podcast. And we just clicked, and then here we are, a year and a half later. Yeah.
Yeah, it's episode 73, darling. And yeah. So, I think it's going to be a year in the spring. We'll have to have a big hoopla celebration.
No, it'll be 2 years.
2 years, that's right. Okay, I'll be fine. Yeah, we don't do 2 episodes a week, right? I'll be all right. I'm fine. I think maybe we should go on to what we've been watching this week before we lose our cookies here.
I've
So
been on
you probably haven't been watching much of anything with baby home.
not a lot. No, not like what I normally do, but Tony and I are stuck on CSI right now. That's our bedtime watch. And so I don't know why we watch these. He loves them. He loves these shows. But he's literally asleep within the first, I want to say 15 minutes. And so I've been really getting into the season, and he wants to, the problem is he falls asleep. So the next night he wants to start that episode over. I'm like, oh no, we don't. Because
You're not going to watch the first 15 minutes over and over and over again.
no, exactly. And I've already seen that episode. So if you want to see the episode, sir, you're going to have to stay awake. And that's just how that works. So, but yeah, other than that, we haven't really been watching like anything super crazy or out of the norm. We did start Traders. That is actually going really fun. I'm excited to see how that season works. That's on Peacock. And we are big Boston Rob fans. We have always been, ever since he was on Survivor, 100 years ago. He's been on that show like 6 or 7 times. And I don't know why we like him so much, because he's kind of a stinker. But we just adore him. And he lives in Pensacola now. So if you want to stalk him, you can like drive by his house,
Well, that might be why, but
which we don't do because we're not weird. But so but yeah, I mean, he lives here. One day he stopped by my husband's work because he went to the wrong place, and my husband's like, my wife is never going to believe this. Would you be willing to take a picture with me so I can prove it to her? He's like, sure. And so he took he's just a really nice person.
oh my gosh.
Oh, what? Okay, so Fire Lake just brought up a TV show, Star Wars Skeleton Crew. And if you're a fan of Treasure Island, you'll really dig it. What is that? And where do I watch it?
Yeah, give us the deets.
And so what have you been watching it?
Well, the Eagles are in the playoffs and they're playing so good right now. So we're hoping that they beat the Rams. Disney Plus. Okay, we might have to check that out.
I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, so every Sunday, Eagles, I've got a special sweatshirt I wear, all of that kind of stuff. And last season, that sweatshirt doomed them. This season, it seems to be working. So whatever. It stars Jude Law. That's awesome. Oh, right. I remember seeing a trailer for that. But basically, we're watching, rewatching the first season of The Old Man. So that because there's so much going on in that show, and we're just about ready to start watching season 2. So,
what's The Old Man?
The Old Man is a Hulu original, and it's espionage. It's one of my favorite genres, reading and whatever. It stars Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow.
Okay.
And I thought Jeff Bridges was the old man, but I was very mistaken. Someone else is the old man. But anyway, he's a spy who went off grid and was in hiding, and they came to find him. And now he's running, but he's so skilled. So he's so good at it that they can't catch him. And he's just this old guy, but he's not the old man. So we're clear, he's not the old man. But it's intense, and you got to pay attention. You can't zone out. That's why we're rewatching the first season, because I'm seeing things I didn't catch the first time. So anyway, that's what's happening.
We're watching on Prime is The Rig, and that one is a Scottish oil rig. That's out in the middle of the ocean, and apparently this ancient something is taking things over. We didn't really realize that it was like an eco-conscious kind of show. I like it just because the characters are all, feisty and yelling at each other. But we started season 2 and realized we can't remember anything about season 1, so we had to rewatch all of season 1 so we could
See?
And after season 1, my husband's like, "You can go on with season 2 without me." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So apparently that is not one of my afternoon shows.
Well, good luck with that.
When I'm not napping.
Oh my gosh. Napping, what is that? All right. Well, that's what we're watching this week. Hopefully we've talked about a few things that you might like to check out. We're not endorsing anything. It's just the crazy stuff we love to watch. And I think we've had a blast today talking about the anatomy of a stitch. There was way more to talk about than we actually realized. So I'm glad that you all had some questions, inserted your comments. That's what makes this so much fun. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your presence with us because that's why we do this. Yes, Biz and I love hanging out together, but you're really why we do this. So
we like hanging out.
Thank you for being here. Exactly. So until next time, Biz, I'm going to say goodbye to you and to everybody. And we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Have a great weekend, everyone.